Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today I'm going to be talking about Cisco certifications and kind of how to prepare for them, what I think is the best way to do that, and kind of some good resources out there for really getting ready for your exam. And mainly I'm going to be talking about the CCNA and CCNP route and switch track, but this really kind of applies to almost any of them. There are differences and nuances to each of the things I'm going to talk about depending on which specific track you're going to go for, such as like security, design, cyber ops. But the general flow of this still applies to most of it. Now, first off, I'm going to apologize for not uploading a video every Monday for the last 2 weeks. I know I said I was going to come out with a video every Monday, but these last couple of weeks I've been in a class. I haven't had time to really sit down and make a new video, so I'm kind of running on a every other week schedule right now. And I actually recorded this video last weekend, but it ended up coming out about an hour and a half long because I rambled on a little too much. So I'm redoing this and I'm going to try to keep this kind of short as possible. If you have any questions about anything that I touch on, just leave it in the comments, send me a message or something, and I can elaborate a little further, but kind of Google these on your own to get a little more detail because I'm kind of just going to hit the high level pros and cons of kind of each of these and just kind of give you my opinion in the way that I studied for my exams, my CCENT, CCNA, and my CCNP route and switch. And I'm going to kind of organize this a little bit better. I'm going to hit 3 main points, and that's going to be foundational knowledge, how to get that, go over some good video courses, and then how to practice the material. So first off, foundational knowledge. Where do you start? Well, if you have an exam in mind, then start at cisco.com and look for the actual exam objectives. Because when you go into the test center to actually sit one of these exams, they're going to have this outline that they're going to test you on. And there's certain topics and certain levels of detail that are going to be actually on the test. And they actually have a list on it under the exam on cisco.com. So you kind of have a good idea of what to study. So if you just go to Cisco's main page and find the exams section, however we do that, career certifications, exams, and here, Cisco career certifications. So let's use CCNA as an example, route and switch. So if we go to CCNA routing and switching, here's an overview of the exam, and if we scroll down, there should be a section that says exam topics. Yeah, here we go. Under the take exam section, you can see we've got the 200-125 CCNA exam topics. Now for this particular certification, there are 3 ways you can get it. You can either take ICND 1 and ICND 2, and that equals a CCNA, or you can take the CCNA combined. If we look at the exam topics for the combined test, then it gives us this breakdown. So you can see we've got 7 sections, and you can break these out. So just looking at the first one, compare and contrast OSI and TCP IP models. So that is something you need to be able to do. You need to know what the OSI model is and the TCP IP model, the different layers of those, and how they relate to one another. Now what the exam topics aren't going to do is they're not going to give you real specific like technologies and in-depth indicators, but you can kind of tell by the language that they use, like compare and contrast network topologies. So you need to know what they are and how they're different, basically, and you don't really need to go any more in-depth than that. If we go down to the routing section, describe the routing concepts, like frame rewrites. You need to know what that is and how to describe it. You need to be able to interpret these things. So kind of just judge the language and what it's talking about. If you don't know what that one topic means, then that's something you need to study. You need to find a resource and get some knowledge on that specific area. Like if we don't know what an SVI is, under configure, verify, and troubleshoot inter VLAN routing, we need to know what that is. And since this says configure, verify, and troubleshoot, we need to know how to actually set up inter VLAN routing and know the commands associated with that. So now that we know what we need to study for a specific exam, we need to go out and get the resource to actually get the foundational knowledge. And this is where I'm going to say that the official certification guide is your best friend. So if we just go to Amazon and we we search CCNA right here. We've got CCNA routing and switching 200-125 official certification guide. And you can see that this is actually 2 books, one for ICND 1 and another for ICND 2. So depending on what exact certification you're going to want to go for, you want these official cert guides to match your exam number So ICND 1, 100-105, 200-105, and you want to make sure that matches the version that is on Cisco.com, the latest version of that exam. You don't want to be buying an old certification guide for a previous version, because there's going to be some info that's either changed or missing. Now there are other resources, such as this one, the Todd Lamel book. Now the official certification guides are usually referred to as the Wendell Odom books, and then there's the Todd Lamel. I think that's how you say his last name. But this is another good book. I personally haven't read it, but I've heard that it's a little easier to follow. The official certification guides by Wendell Odom are dry. There's no two ways about that. It is very technical, and it is what you need to know and all the details about it. There's not really going to be much fun language in there, a lot to hold your attention. It's got what you need and not really much more. I've heard that this is written better and it's a little easier to read, but again, I haven't read it, but it's another good resource. And I know I'm saying Wendell Odom in the official certification guide, but Wendell Odom doesn't write all of them. So if you're going for like CCNA Security, CCNA Design, CCNP, CCIE, those are written by different authors, but they're still the official certification guide range. Another book that I like to throw out there is not Network Switch, it is Network Warrior. And this is kind of after you have good foundational knowledge and you've read the official certification guide. This is stuff that isn't particularly on the exam or necessarily on the exam, but it's stuff that's really good to know, especially if you plan to actually work on this stuff in the field. It kind of bridges the gaps that you might not have thought of while you're actually reading the dry material and studying for an exam. It's a little more practical. Great info to have. I'm actually in the middle of reading it right now, so haven't finished it. It's obviously not helping me on any exam, but just thought I would throw it out there. And I know there's a few video courses that actually recommend this book as well. And speaking of video courses, this is the next section I like to go into. So I recommend either reading the book first, front to back, or substituting some video courses in while you're in a specific chapter. What you don't want to do, though, is just get video courses and study video courses, because while they have a lot of great information and they're awesome for helping you understand that information, I haven't yet found one video course that actually has everything in it that you need. The video courses aren't really following the objectives line by line like the official cert guide is, but they're hitting the main points and they're going into detail and they're giving additional explanations like a real world application that makes it a lot more interesting and easy to watch. So don't just pick up a video course and just use that as your prep. You're going to be missing some things. Now, the first video course I'm going to bring up is CBT Nuggets. One of the most popular ones. A lot of people like them. And their main draw is that they're pretty entertaining and they're engaging. And they really explain a lot of practical things and they give a lot of real world background and examples and a lot of input on the topic. Personally, for CCNA, this was my favorite video course. I really liked Jeremy Chara. I think the course that I did was 2 versions ago. And one of the downsides, at least for me, is that they're a little too excited about teaching it, at least lately. The older video courses that I went through, Jeremy Chara was fairly laid back. He was still a little bit over the top, but it was manageable. But it seems like with every series, he just goes more and more insane. Like, just sign up for a trial and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. It's almost like he's laughing his way through the course. Almost like he's trying too hard to be engaging. For me, it's off-putting. For you, it might be awesome, but that's my first downside, and that's just a personal downside. The other downside is that CBT Nuggets doesn't cover everything. Again, I haven't found one video course that really does, but I did find that there was a lot of information that was left out and a lot of detail that was overlooked. So it didn't quite go as in-depth as I needed it to for the exam, but it held my attention and it made me want to actually learn the objectives that maybe I was struggling with in the book because they were just too dry and I wasn't getting it. Now, other downsides is that it's expensive and it uses a subscription-only model. So if we just look for CCNA here, we should see Jeremy Chara's course come up. Yep, CCNA Routing and Switching with Jeremy Chara, Keith Barker. And we can start a free week, but after that, it's going to be $60 a month. Now that is expensive, but it's not the most expensive. There are other video courses that I'm going to mention that are actually more than this. And I do know that with this subscription, you do get lab guides, some documents, and practice exams, I do believe. I've never used their practice exams, but that's another resource that you really want before you actually sit the actual exam, is you want some practice questions. You want to get used to the way they ask the questions and how you should answer them, because you might have heard of the Cisco answer. There's a lot of argument on whether or not that actually exists. I personally believe that it does exist, because there is a certain way that Cisco asks their questions on the exams that are a little weird, and seems like there's more than one correct answer for a question, but if you've read the official certification guide, you'll kind of catch on that they're leading you in a certain direction. There is a certain answer that they believe is right, and if you think about it enough, you'll realize that it actually is a right answer, but you might think it's questionable. So practice exams being included are definitely worth it. And also labs, because once we get to the lab section, that's kind of the biggest downfall of some ways of labbing, is that you don't have an outline. If you don't have an outline or something solid to practice when you actually go to practice this stuff, then you'll kind of just be lost and you'll waste a lot of time. So having a structured lab guide is a great resource to have, and these courses usually come with those. Next video course I'm going to mention is INE. This was personally my favorite for the CCNP exam. I think it was Keith Bogart that did that. But good sides about INE that I thought is that there's tons of hours of video. There's actually a ridiculous amount and length of videos that you get with the courses, and it goes into such granular detail that if you don't know exactly how that technology works and how to configure it by the end of the series, then you weren't paying attention, because he goes so far into depth. At least Keith Bogart goes so far into depth that you really understand and you know everything there is to know about the topics that they cover. I think my CCNP course had about 220 videos in it, and it was about 150 gigs worth, and I could actually download those videos and keep them on my hard drive, watch them offline. And it also came with practice tests and labs. There was actually a video course for labs, so not only did you get a lab guide, structured study method, but you also got videos to go along with it, so you could actually see him go through your same lab as well and explain why or why not certain things were the way they were. So that was an awesome resource for me. And also included in my course was the rack rental tokens. So INE is actually a provider of rack rentals, which is where you pay for time to use physical equipment for practice. And that's really useful at, say, CCIE level. CCIE and around that expert level, they really use real equipment and rack rentals and all that kind of stuff to practice for that. CCNA level, that's not so useful. I mean, it's great, but it's not something you necessarily need. But my CCNP course came with that. Now, the downside is that, from what I can tell, they've moved to a subscription-only model. When I bought my course, it was actually, I paid X price for that course, and I had it for life, and I was able to download all the resources. From what I gathered now is that you need a subscription, and they have what's called an all-access pass. You have access to every course that they have, but you pay a monthly rate, and it is not cheap. It's a little bit more than CBT Nuggets. So let's see if we can sign up here. Yeah, so right here, for an individual plan, it's $1,000 a year or $100 a month. So it's more expensive than CBT Nuggets, but in my opinion, you do get a lot more. And it looks like right here, you actually get a free Nest camera or doorbell if you sign up for a year. So if you spend $1,000 for a year of videos, then you get a free Nest camera. That's kind of cool, but that's a lot of money. So INE isn't for everyone. INE is really focused at that expert level stuff. So for me, for CCNA, while INE is awesome, just because it is so expensive, I would probably steer clear of it at the CCNA level and kind of really worry about getting INE when you hit CCNP or CCIE. But personally, this one was my favorite for CCNP, where CBT Nuggets was my favorite for CCNA. Now, the third one I'm going to talk about is Udemy. So you might have heard of Udemy from, Reddit really likes to recommend the Udemy courses by Chris Bryant, and they are awesome courses. I'll agree with that 100%. And the best thing about them is that they are not expensive as opposed to CBT Nuggets or INE, and it's not a subscription-based model either. So right here, you've got CCNA 2018 It's $20. You pay $20, you get that course. And they've also got a mobile app. So you have access to that forever, and you can stream it on your phone. You can stream it on the website. You can even download the videos. However, downloading Udemy videos is really instructor specific. So Chris Bryant allows you to do that, but other courses on this website you might not be able to. Now, I actually used Chris Bryant's CCNP course for my CCNP cert, but not as much as I did INE. I really used this for my lunch break study sessions. So whenever I would just go out, had an hour for lunch, I would grab some food, sit in my truck, and I would put on a Chris Bryant video just to kind of reinforce some topics and learn. And from what I can tell is it's a little bit in between CBT Nuggets and INE. He goes into a little bit of depth. Well, I don't want to say a little bit of depth. He goes into depth, but not as far as INE, but further than CBT Nuggets. And he's a little bit between dry and actually engaging. He's not as excited about it as CBT Nuggets, but he isn't as dry and fact-driven as INE. So really, this is a happy medium, and if you're just getting into this, especially for the CCNA, I would get his video course just because of, one, the price, and two, it is great information, and it's kind of between the two other ones that I've mentioned. And also, Udemy tends to put their video courses on sale fairly often. So when I bought this course, I think it was $12 or maybe $13. It seems like they have a sale every weekend where all of their courses you can get for like $12. So it's a really good value, sales all the time, and you do have access to this for forever. It's not subscription based. And of course, the downside about it is that there is some information lacking. I found that in my CCNP course. His videos didn't have enough information for me personally, but this is the case with pretty much all the videos where there's some topics that aren't necessarily covered or certain details are looked over. That's not really a downside because all of them have the same issues. Now, kind of a bonus is like YouTube or Cybrary, or if you just Google CCNA video courses, which I guess we can do that right now. You can see there's tons of resources everywhere that I didn't touch. So here, this top one, Udemy, I covered that. There's Cybrary, I've actually been there. And actually one of my CCNA instructors that I had in person at my last job, he did the CCNA course for Cybrary, but as much as it pains me to say it, I can't recommend it because I think it was probably one of the first video courses he ever did, maybe the only video course he ever did, and it's pretty awkward. He was definitely my favorite instructor in person by far. I wish that he would have stuck around to do the rest of my courses, but unfortunately some stuff happened with him, and we never got a chance to actually have another course with him. So basically my point is that there are other video course options out there besides these that I've listed, but if you're going to go down the route of kind of these like offshoot places or YouTube or stuff like that, kind of know what you're looking for. You should already have studied the book, maybe looked at another video course or something, and kind of know where your gaps are, and then Google courses or videos specific to that topic. There are tons of great videos out there that cover specific topics that might touch on stuff that your other video courses or your book didn't, or they make something click for you in a way that the book or another video course didn't either. So for me, I looked up a lot of offshoot videos about like BGP because I had a hard time really understanding what I was doing with it, and I had to take probably about 6 different videos from 6 different places on the exact same topic for me to really understand certain aspects of it. So that's really all the video courses I have that I've either used or I know about. So let's kind of move into probably everybody's favorite portion, and that's practicing this material. So if you're just starting out, you might be a little overwhelmed, for one, with the amount of information, say in the CCNA, or if you're moving on to CCNP, you might be overwhelmed with the amount of depth of the information. And you might not know exactly how you're going to get your experience with this, because what you need for the exam is actual hands-on experience that says you know how to configure these certain technologies and you know how to troubleshoot it. And that's what you want in the job or the workplace. When you want to get hired for a position like this, they need to know that you actually know what you're doing with the real equipment. So if you're just starting out and you need the certification to work on the equipment, but they're not going to let you work on the equipment without the certification, then what do you do? How do you practice this stuff? Well, there's quite a few options to this actually, and it's really blown up in the last, I guess it's been like 10 years now, but there's a lot of different ways you can practice these concepts, and each of them have pros and cons. There's definitely some major upsides to certain methods, and there's definitely major downsides to it as well. So I'm going to cover really two or three different ways to practice. It can basically be broken up into what's called a simulator, and then an emulator, and real equipment. So a simulator is going to be a program. Let me just bring up Packet Tracer here. So here's Packet Tracer's website. You can download it for free. This is a simulator, and I also have it installed on my computer, so I'm going to bring it up. And here's the interface for Packet Tracer. So what it is a simulator, and it's a program that was written so that you can practice these commands, but it's not really running anything. It's kind of just code that's simulating the experience of working with real equipment. And because of that, there's going to be some things that are missing and some quirks. So just kind of an example, if you've ever been inside actual equipment before, you'll know that if we go to an interface and we type in a question mark, there's a massive list of commands that you can put in there. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. But on here, if we enter interface fast Ethernet 01 and we just do a question mark, you can see there's a very limited list. And it's not what makes it a simulator, but it's one of the side effects of it being a simulator, is that Packet Tracer was written for the CCNA level route switch, and also a little bit for voice and security, as well as design. So it doesn't go into very complex technologies. Pretty much everything that you need to know to pass the CCNA is going to be able to be practiced in this program. But if you have any real world experience, or you want to go any deeper with these technologies, it's going to be a little difficult, because a lot of the commands or technologies just won't be supported because they're not needed for the exam purpose. But specifically about Packet Tracer, it is great for CCENT or CCNA. It covers pretty much all the topics that you need to know, and it goes enough into depth for you to pass the exam. And like I said, it also has voice and like some server and security and other stuff thrown in. And the voice and server options really kind of expand the knowledge base, and it makes it a little more realistic and fun, I think. And I would definitely start with Packet Tracer. If you haven't practiced anything before, download Packet Tracer. It's free now. Used to, you had to have been signed up into a Networking Academy class to download it, and not everyone had access. But ever since version 7, it's been freely available. All you have to do is create an account on their website, and you're able to download it. And there's also video courses that either revolve around Packet Tracer or actually go into CCENT or CCNA, and they use Packet Tracer as their program for practice. And they also have labs for these if you can find them. Networking Academy obviously has labs that you can download if you're in one of their courses, but people kind of make labs for this, and you're able to download the packet file and open it in your version of Packet Tracer, and you can kind of have a troubleshooting scenario ready to go. It's really flexible. And actually for CCNA, and a little bit beyond, even though I probably shouldn't have been using it for beyond CCNA, but I spent hours upon hours upon hours in Packet Tracer, and I pretty much hit the program's limits. Like, I would have 100 nodes in here with a massive network, and here's where the downsides come in. I'd have constant crashes, and I'd have bugs out the ass. But I loved every minute of it because it was fun. I could throw the servers in there, I could throw the phones in there, I could program the switches and the routers and all of that to all talk to each other and make a massive network. And if you throw a PC in here, you actually have a PC interface, so you can actually pretend like you're using it like an end user. And you have a web browser. You can set up DNS servers, web servers. You can even put Java into your web server. So there's a lot that makes it really interesting to use Packet Tracer and really hold your attention, because let's be honest, just practicing how to input VLANs and propagate VLANs or port actions isn't very much fun when you can't really see the effect of it. So with this program, you just have these PCs that act like lightweight PCs, and you're able to actually see the benefits of what you're configuring and why. It really helped in my understanding of things. Now, if you're going, I've already said it, if you're going for CCNP or something like that, CCIE for sure, you're not even going to be thinking about Packet Tracer. So CCNA and below for Packet Tracer. But it is, in my opinion, the best thing you can use for that level next to real equipment, which I'll get to later. Now, the second simulator that I'm going to talk about is going to be Boson. And you might have heard of this on Reddit or something, but the Netsim is specifically what I'm talking about. Now, I've used this. I was fortunate enough to have a kind of a trial license for the full-on CCNP version of this, and I actually really liked it. It had a ton of labs built into it, which is unheard of. Well, not unheard of, but it's the only one on this list that actually has pre-built labs, and the labs are awesome. So once you boot up the software, you just kind of click on what technology or lab you want to run, and it'll pre-populate the devices. It'll give you a scenario. You can enter your commands, troubleshoot it, change the configurations, try to get it working right, and then it'll actually run a script against it, and it'll tell you what commands you did right, what commands you missed. So it is great for study, and I wish I would have known about this when I was actually studying for both CCNA and CCNP. I knew Netsim existed, but I didn't pursue it because I didn't remember it being that great. I had to use it for job training, and I really thought that it was dated and just a piece of junk. But they've come a long way, and it's really awesome, especially for the labs. Now, the downside is what you're looking at right now, and that's the price. So for CCENT, it's $100 for your license, and if you're doing CCNP, then it's $349. It's a lot of money, but if you don't really have any other way to practice anything, I would say it's worth it, just for the labs alone. Now, some other downsides are the interface, for me at least, was a little hard to use. It's different than the other things I'm used to using, and it was a little bit slow. It seemed like the devices had to boot, even though it is a simulator and it's not really running any software that I know of, but I don't know. I haven't dug too deep into exactly how it works or why it would be slow. But actually, before I move on from Boson, there was a couple things that I neglected to mention that I meant to bring up about them. Number one is their practice exams. I should have mentioned this near the end of this video, but I didn't, so I'm going to mention it now. Their practice exams are my favorite. So while I said CBT Nuggets and INE came with practice exams, and it's a really good resource to have, Boson's I think are the best. I actually did a few of those and bought them for both CCNA and CCNP. And for me, I think they were the most challenging and also the most closely worded to the actual exam. So if you're just looking for the practice exams, come back to Boson. I highly recommend those. And also their CCNP T-Shoot simulator, which is this right here. It's not Netsim. It's actually a simulator, exam simulator basically for the T-Shoot exam on CCNP. And this is the closest you can get to the actual T-Shoot exam. Now it is expensive. This XSim Max is about $300 in itself, but if you're going for the T-Shoot exam and you're not that confident and you want something to help you practice, this is very close to how it's going to feel when you actually sit down in the exam, because the interface that it has is so smushed, which if you've ever taken a Cisco exam before, you'll know that you only have a tiny like 4x3 monitor to do the exam on, and you have to manage your screen real estate properly. And this simulator is great for that. It simulates it nearly perfectly. Anyways, that's the last simulator in this list. I'm going to move on to emulators, which you might have heard of. And the first one I'm going to start with is GNS3, the most popular. And this is where we're kind of getting into more complicated ways to study. When you're dealing with emulators, you're dealing with actual software images, and you're going to be running basically what you would be working with in the real world. And in order to do that, not on the equipment that it was intended for, there's kind of a lot of extra preparation and a lot of extra configuration that has to even go into practicing the configuration you want to practice. So that's the major downside with these emulators, is basically setup time and just what you need to know to get it off the ground. And that's going to be the same for all of these emulators that I mentioned. But this one, in my opinion, is the best of the emulators. It's my favorite. Maybe I shouldn't have said best, but it's still my favorite. This was my go-to for my CCNP study, at least for the route and troubleshooting exams. I did use a different emulator for Switch, but I'll get to that one. And the reason that I like it is that it can run many different, I think they're like emulation types. There's like, what is it, Q, EMU, It can run iOS over Linux, and it can run VIRL images, which I'll talk about VIRL after this one. But basically you have a ton of different options, and it can run a ton of different images. You can even run VirtualBox VMs. You can have a Windows VM in there, Linux VMs. You can emulate Juniper equipment. You can emulate ASAs with a VIRL image. Pretty much anything that is able to be emulated, you can throw into your GNS3 environment and interconnect it with your devices. And you can also connect a GNS3 instance to your actual physical network. So if you do have a physical lab, or you just want to test it with your home network or your home internet connection, you can actually bridge that on the PC that you're running it on, and it'll have a connection to your actual physical network. And if you want to SSH into that and manage devices, you can, and it'll look just like it's a part of your network. So it's pretty awesome, and the possibilities are almost endless with it. But again, the downside is it is a little complicated to set up, and it depends on what you're wanting to do with it and what you're wanting to run as to how complicated that's going to be. If you're wanting to run iOS over Linux or VIRL images on here or containers, there's going to be more configuration because you have to use what's called their GNS3 VM. So you have to set up a virtual machine to host the server, and then add your images onto that and deal with all that server crap, which can be a pain in the ass, especially if you're first getting started. I wouldn't recommend this for CCENT or CCNA unless you've already had some kind of like server or application background and you don't mind learning how to actually set up your study environment, because it is a lot of work to get running. And then lastly, on the downsides, and it's probably the most argued and the biggest downside, is that you have to have your own images. And obtaining Cisco iOS images legally can be a little weird or hard. So knowing where to get images is probably the biggest issue with this, unless you don't mind violating Cisco's terms of service. And there's a lot of people that have very big issues with that. So that's an argument in a video for a whole other time. But if you have images lying around that you've obtained in a legit manner, then that's probably the biggest hurdle to using an emulator. Now, speaking of obtaining images legally, there is Cisco VIRL, and that's VIRL, and this is Cisco's official emulator. So it works in much the same way as GNS3. It actually runs real images that would be what you're working with in the real world. However, they're licensed to you by Cisco. So for buying a license to VIRL, you also get a license to use these images, which is the iOS V Layer 2, XR, OS, whatever. All of those you actually own the rights to use. So if you buy a license of VIRL, you can take these images and import them into whatever other emulator you want because you have license to use them. And that is the biggest pro, I think, to VIRL. Now, obviously, you pay for it because it is official Cisco software and you have license to these images. It is about $200 and it's a subscription-based model. So they do have discounts for students and other employees, but I think the price is really around $200. I guess we can click on something and see how much it is. So get VIRL PE, yep, $200 for a year. So $200 a year if you want to use VIRL. Now, I haven't used VIRL since I think 2014 when it really first came out, and back then I thought it was very difficult to use. I was just starting out. I was barely finished with my CCNA. It took me a few days to really understand how to set up the VM and get VIRL working. So I didn't really start using GNS3 until after I tried VIRL. Both of these are a little complicated to set up, even though I think Cisco's VIRL has gotten a bit better. I think their interface is better, and I think their instructions for installing it are also a lot better. It's probably more streamlined now, but I just remember my experience was it was a pain in the ass and the interface was clunky at best. And also, you do have a node limit with VIRL, so you can only run 20 nodes at the same time, and let me tell you, your computer probably will not be able to run close to that amount unless you have a baller PC or a server. These iOS V images, the ones that were made for VIRL, they are pretty resource intensive. They're not like iOS over Linux or the QEMU images, whatever. Those are pretty lightweight. In my GNS3 topology for CCNP, I actually had 150 routers that I was able to run at the same time with no issues. But with VIRL, if I had 8 VIRL nodes, like layer 2 iOS V, then I can actually feel my computer being bogged down by it. But if anything, get VIRL for the licenses that it comes with, because they are valuable. And the last emulator that I'm going to talk about is EVE-NG. Now this one, at least to me, is pretty new. I didn't know about this until sometime earlier this year, or maybe late last year. And this one is basically, I'm going to call it GNS3 web-based, even though it's not. That's not fair to this at all, really. But it didn't remind me of VIRL, and it's like GNS3, as in you have to set it up yourself and you have to obtain your own images. And it can run containers, basically. Like, it's a lot like GNS3. Let me just pull up the interface here. So this is kind of what it looks like. You still have your devices that you can click on, log into, start them. But the main difference between this and GNS3 is that EVE-NG is all web-based. It is a web client. You don't have to have standalone software on your computer to run, which for me, this is awesome because I can host it out of my house, and while I'm on the go, if I want to study something real quick, or if I want to go to a coffee shop and study and be away from the distractions of my house, I can just log into my home emulated lab and start labbing because it's all hosted on a website, and it has an HTML5 console, so I don't need to even have a terminal application installed on my computer in order to configure equipment. I just click on it, it'll open a new browser tab, and there's my command line. It's pretty awesome, and right now this is the one that I use, even though I'm not really going for any certifications currently. But I use this to kind of train other people, because you can create user accounts, you can all log in, you can all be working on the same lab, and it doesn't matter where you are as long as you have it set up for internet access. But that's the biggest drawback, is setting it up. Because in order for you to actually get this off the ground and install it on a server and forward the ports and all that, you have to kind of have a little bit of networking knowledge already. So I can't really recommend this for starting out at CCENT or CCNA, because you're basically building a web server and hosting it yourself. And that in itself is kind of networking study. So I would recommend this for CCNP and above for sure. Some other downsides of it are the web interface is a little bit clunky. You can't connect nodes that are both powered on. You have to power down the node and then drag a cable and select the interfaces. It's pretty slow and difficult to navigate sometimes, but that's also because I'm using what's called the Community Edition, which is free. You don't have to pay for the Community Edition of EVE-NG, but they do have a paid option, which I think is $200. Let me look at it real quick. Buy personal, the professional license, I mean. Let's see, buy now. And it's $117 for the professional edition. And what that gets you is a lot more, I think you get a lot more user accounts and a lot more SSH sessions or something like that. They have a big pros and cons list, basically comparing the two. So here's the feature comparison. All the check marks are basically the professional edition, and all the X's are the community edition. Honestly, for me, the professional edition wasn't worth it, because the only things I would have wanted is the ability to put in links on the fly without turning the equipment off, as well as there was one more thing that I really would have wanted. Oh, I think it was the node limit. You have a 63 node limit on the community edition, where the professional one has 1,024, which if your computer can run 1,000 emulated routers, then congratulations, your computer is a supercomputer. For me, I hit the kind of limit of processing power for what I have around 200 nodes. So 1,000, I can't even imagine running that. But not really going to spend any more time on EVE-NG. I'm going to call it GNS3 in a web browser, because pretty much all of the same pros and the cons apply, except for the user interface for Eve is, in my opinion, a lot less polished than GNS3, but the ability to have it in a web browser is way better than having standalone software connecting to a server. Oh, and it's also worth mentioning that you can use all of the same images, like VIRL images, with it, and there's actually really good documentation on how to install anything, really. So if you want to add Cisco IOSV images, you would just look for the add images from VIRL, and here's a how-to. And the server actually is Linux based, so there's going to be Linux command line and file moving that you got to do to set up these containers, but their help section and how to actually add images to the server is, in my opinion, very good. It's very straightforward. and I haven't had an issue getting an image to actually run correctly yet. Now this brings us to the last part, and that is real equipment, obviously. So I think this is the best way to study no matter what the level. However, it only becomes necessary, I would say, above CCNA, so CCNP and CCIE. You don't really need real equipment for the CCENT or CCNA, but it is good knowledge to have because there's a lot of nuances with actually running real equipment that you don't realize when you're emulating it or simulating it. So you'll wind up kind of learning more about how to work with cabling and consoles and updating iOS images than you really do getting into the CCNA topics, because you get the equipment in the mail, you've never worked with one before, you plug it in, it comes on, and then you're like, now what? How do I configure it? I know that I should just log into it and do these commands and get the access ports set up, but how do I get to that here? How do I connect the console? How do I configure PuTTY to actually get into it? My iOS is out of date. How do I update it? There's a lot of stuff that you learn when you're working with new equipment that may not be on the exam, but is necessary for you to know if you're going to be working with this in real life. Now, the downside is that you're going to be limited by your budget. You have to set everything up, so you have to know about cabling, you have to know about console cables, you have to kind of know how to work with your equipment, and you have to know what to buy. And when you're researching what to buy, you're going to get stuck on Cisco's website trying to decipher model numbers. So if you've ever tried to actually search for real equipment, you'll see like, oh, I want a layer 3 switch. Well, what do you want? Do you want the 3550? Do you want the 3750, the 3560, the 3650? It goes on and on. There's multiple models that are layer 3 switches. And then you go to look at them and you've got the WS37 or 3750E or G or ETES, EPS. There's so many different variations of the models that you can quickly get confused if you don't know what you're looking for. But when you're studying that and trying to figure it all out, you're learning a lot of valuable information that a lot of people who even have their certifications don't know because they've never had to actually deal with or shop for actual equipment. But it can be daunting. Basically, that's my point, is that it can get overwhelming if you're trying to build out your own lab piece by piece and not knowing what to get. But it's worth it. I guess I can kind of offer some insight. If you are looking to build your own lab, look at the 1841 or the 2811 or maybe even 2911 series for routers, and basically stick with 3560s for the switches, because those are going to support everything. And that's another thing that you're going to have to get into, knowing what physical equipment supports what and the differences between them all. So like, people might mention, oh, get a 2950, get a 2960, get a 3750. Like, they're viable options, but you just have to know that a 2950 and a 2960 are layer 2 only, and they only support the version 12 iOS. Whereas a 3550 is layer 3, but I think that one only supports 12, maybe it supports 15. Whereas a 3560 is a layer 3 that supports both 12 and version 15. And if you don't know what the different versions of iOS are, essentially, I think a few exams back it was all based on 12, and all of the new exams are now based on version 15. And the syntax, while the commands are roughly the same, the syntax can be a little bit different between the two versions. And you need to know what version is going to be used on the test and what technologies they support. So 3560 is going to support all of your switching technologies up to, I believe, up to CCIE. And your 2811s and 2911s, those are going to support mostly all of your router functions up to CCIE as well. Don't be like me and just find a cheap 2940 on eBay and be like, well, I'm going to buy that for 20 bucks. It'll be a perfect lab switch, and then realize that it barely supports anything at all. And actually, if you don't feel like parting out your own lab, you can also search for pre-made labs, which I want to recommend, but I don't at the same time, just because of the price. Usually you can part these things out for a lot cheaper than they're selling them for in bulk, but they do come with pretty racks and the right cables and all the right flash memory, and they're ready to go. You don't really have to figure anything out. But to me, that's kind of the beauty in getting real equipment, is figuring out how to make that physical box function how you think it should, and knowing what all components go with it, knowing that you need a flash card for that memory, knowing that you need a proper console cable, and you need a good iOS version and all of that crap. I just like people kind of fumbling their way through that for some reason. It might be a little cruel, but it's a great way to learn, and that's what your employer is going to do. Basically, if you go show up on day one and you say you know Cisco, and then they hand you a switch and they're like, all right, configure this, you better know how to plug it in and get into it, at least. Now, this is the point in the video where I'm kind of going to go back again to cover a little bit that I missed. So while we're talking about real equipment and how it's really good to know how to set it all up and all that, there are a few other advantages to it as well. So something I kind of forgot to mention with the simulators and emulators is that simulators, while they're confined to their own exams, like limited command set, they do support layer 2 practice. So switching, you'll find when you're studying, is a little bit hard to practice at a high level without the real equipment. And that is because the simulators are going to be locked into the level that they're locked into, and there's going to be certain switching functions that you can practice and others that you can't. And then when you move into emulators, while it's running an actual image that you would see in real life, layer 2 emulation hasn't really come far enough to not be completely free of bugs. So when I was studying for like CCNP, I was using VIRL for switch because the VIRL images, I thought at the time, supported layer 2 the best. And there's certain topics such as VLAN access lists, private VLANs, ether channels, and stuff like that that kind of have some bugs in the emulation world. So while you have GNS3 or even G and you throw in your, say, iOS over Linux or VIRL images into there, and then you try to set up like HSRP with an ether channel and private VLANs, you might run into some bugs. So I know for a fact that with the images I use in even G, an ether channel will come up, it'll say it's functioning, you can do all the verification and it'll look fine, but it'll set up and tear down and flap and all kinds of weird stuff while it's doing that. So you'll get all kinds of console output saying that it's going up, it's going down. Sometimes you can ping across it, sometimes you can't. So it's kind of weird stuff like that that you run into in the emulation world, and that's one reason why the real equipment is much better to practice on, because you won't have that kind of software bug or emulation problem with it, because it's the actual equipment. It's made to run that. It's supposed to be used in production. Now, also kind of on the flip side of that, there are some features that are not supported on certain device models. So I know I recommended like the 1841 or the 2911 and the 3560 switch. That's actually one. The 3560, while it supports pretty much everything up to the CCIE level, there are a few like specialized features that, say, your CCNP will cover that your 3560 isn't going to be able to do. One of those is going to be like VSS. That's a feature that's covered in the CCNP route switch exam, in the actually specifically in the switch exam, that you can't really practice because emulators don't support VSS, and real equipment, that's pretty much a feature that's only available on the high-end stuff. So you're not really going to be buying one of those off of eBay. So like I know the 6509 chassis switches support VSS. So that's one of those features that you're really not going to be able to practice both in emulation or in simulation. Sorry, not simulation, and real hardware, because it's too expensive. Now, the only one I know that supports VSS was the Boson Netsim. They actually had a lab for VSS and you were able to configure it, but that was a simulation. It was made for specifically that function. So those are kind of the things I overlooked while I was talking about emulators. The layer 2 emulation is specifically something you want to pay attention to, and also those high-end features that might be covered in CCNP or beyond in CCIE that the equipment that I mentioned don't necessarily support. But I think I've beat all these topics to death. I said I was going to make this shorter, but I don't really think I did a very good job of that. So if you want any more information on any of the stuff that I've covered, or thought that I did something wrong, or you don't agree with something, just let me know in the comments. If you do want separate videos on kind of any of these, like how to use any of the emulators or simulators or real equipment, I would do a video on how to use the official certification guide, but you'd probably be bored to death me telling you how to read a book. But I digress from that. This was just kind of my opinion and my way of studying. I know I said that I was going to probably talk about some of the other tracks like CCNA security, CCNA design, which I really only mentioned with Packet Tracer, but you can with VIRL emulate a ASA, I think. Actually, I might be wrong about VIRL being able to do that, but you can emulate an ASA in GNS3 for sure if you have the right image for it. So you need to look up what you need to be practicing on if you're going for those special certifications such as security or voice. So voice is going to use the phones, which actually I'm looking right at a physical lab here for voice, which has physical phones in it. That's probably, I would probably get some phones, and real phones, if I was studying for voice, but basically I don't even know what I'm talking about at this point because this is so different from all my other videos that I make. I really just had bullet points of, hey, talk about the book, talk about the videos, and talk about practicing it. So I just kind of went with what I did and what I know about. So the ones that I can vouch for, I think are great, but they might not work for you. So do your research before you really start getting into studying this, because you're going to be investing a lot of time, especially if you're going above CCNA, or especially if you're going for CCIE. You're going to be living with this stuff. You might as well put a ring on it, marry it, and have a few children, make some smaller switches or routers, because it's going to be your life, and you don't want to be spending too much time with this setup of all of it, or not really knowing what you're doing if you're going to be investing that much time in something like this. But hopefully this video kind of helped you a little bit. I think I've already told you to slam some stuff down in the comments. I'm almost to 300 subscribers, so it's a pretty big day for me. It'll be awesome if I can hit 300. My goal is 1,000, so I can try to get monetized again and hound you with ads, but I'm still a long way off from that. So hope you have a good time networking, and I hope you learned something from this video. See you next time.